I still remember the cold snap in my mother's voice the day she called me useless. 3 months earlier, I was in a horrific car accident that crushed my legs. I woke up in a hospital bed to the news that I'd never walk again. My entire world tilted. I had gone from a rising star at a tech firm to a patient who needed help just to stand. My father's eyes, once so proud, were cast down in shame. My older sister shifted uncomfortably, as if my bandaged legs were offensive. My younger brother, who used to ask me for advice on everything, couldn't even look me in the eye. But the moment that truly shattered me came one evening in my parents' living room. I was in a wheelchair, still reeling from pain, when my mother sighed and whispered to my aunt, "She's useless now. I'm not sure what we'll do with her." I heard it. They thought I was asleep. A worthless, crippled burden. My heart clenched like a fist in my chest. Hot tears pricked the back of my eyes. But I didn't cry. I was too numb to cry. In that moment, though, I made myself a silent vow. They would regret underestimating me. Because I still had a plan, one that would soon be worth $50 million. Before the accident, I was known in my field for my sharp instincts. I developed software solutions for major corporations, consulting on everything from streamlining supply chains to launching new e-commerce platforms. My parents never fully understood what I did, but they liked boasting that I was a genius with computers. Now, the only words they had for me were burden, liability, or crippled. They didn't see me as a person, just a problem. My mother even suggested looking into long-term care facilities. A place to keep me safe, she said, but what she meant was keep me out of sight. While my body struggled to heal, my mind raced with ideas. If I couldn't walk, I could still type. If I couldn't drive, I could still innovate. During those long days in the hospital, I began sketching out a new startup concept, one I'd long kept on the back burner. It was a platform that would revolutionize how medium-sized companies manage their inventory. I'd seen the gap in the market years ago and had quietly started coding a prototype. Now, forced to lie in bed, I had all the time in the world to refine my plan. Soon enough, I realized this idea could be big. Massive, in fact. When I finally got discharged from the hospital and rolled back into my childhood home, my family's pity was stifling. My mother hovered, adjusting pillows and offering me bland casseroles. My father, uncomfortable with my wheelchair, pretended to be busy with yard work whenever I was in the room. My siblings mostly stayed away. It was as if my presence reminded them of an inconvenience they couldn't solve. But in my bedroom, once decorated with trophies and medals from my academic triumphs, I turned my computer on. The screen glowed, and I felt my old fire returning. My injuries hadn't stolen my brain, they hadn't taken my grit. So every sleepless night, every lonely morning, I poured my soul into coding. Days blurred as I refined user interfaces, tested algorithms, debugged code. Slowly, the dream platform took shape. Occasionally, I'd hear my mother murmuring into the phone in the next room, complaining about how expensive a wheelchair ramp is, or what a shame it is to see a bright girl wasted. She didn't know I was building a multi-million-dollar empire right under her roof, an empire that would soon turn all their pity into stunned awe. But for now, they saw nothing, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The turning point came when an old colleague, Barry, reached out. He'd heard about my accident, but also knew my reputation for problem-solving. He asked if I'd be open to consulting remotely for a mid-sized distribution company struggling with inventory chaos. I nearly jumped out of my wheelchair with excitement. When we had our first video call, Barry looked hesitant. "You sure you're up for this?" he asked gently, eyeing my hospital gown in the background photos. But I gave him my best confident grin. "I'm exactly the right person," I said, and I meant it. We spent weeks untangling that distribution company's data nightmares. In the process, I quietly tested my own platform, still unnamed, on their system. The results were astonishing. Inventory errors dropped by 70% within a month. Shipping times improved. They saved thousands of dollars in wasted stock. Barry was floored. "This is incredible," he whispered, scanning through the real-time graphs. He had no idea he was previewing the skeleton of my secret startup. Meanwhile, every time I ventured into the kitchen, my parents sighed. My father would ask if I needed help using the bathroom, reminding me of my limitations. They still thought I was incompetent. They had no idea I was building an empire that would soon eclipse anything they ever dreamed of. My sister, Clara, was the only one who showed any glimmer of genuine concern about my mental state. One evening, she knocked on my door and actually asked how I was doing. Not physically, but mentally. I hesitated. Should I trust her? She'd been distant since the accident, but I could see genuine worry in her eyes. So I gave her a partial truth. I'm working on some coding projects, trying to keep my mind active. She looked relieved. That's good, she said softly. Mom and Dad, they're worried you might never move on. Move on? The words stung. They seemed convinced that once you're in a wheelchair, your life is on hold forever. But I just nodded. No point in arguing. The next morning, though, I caught my father rummaging through my desk. What are these complicated spreadsheets? He muttered, eyebrows furrowed. Without waiting for my explanation, he left, shaking his head. Probably decided it was nonsense. I bit my tongue, deciding to keep silent. Let them dismiss me. Let them think my spreadsheets and code are worthless busywork. Because one day soon, I'd reveal the full scope of my project, a platform that would become my golden ticket out of their condescension. And it was on track to be worth far more than they could imagine. Clara's quiet attempts to be supportive didn't stop our parents from holding a family meeting to discuss what to do with me. They called me into the living room, where I found them seated in a circle of armchairs. I rolled up, forcing my face to remain impassive. My mother cleared her throat. Sweetheart, we've been talking. We think it's best if we look into assisted living for you. Somewhere with professionals, people who can handle your needs. My father chimed in. We can help pay for it, maybe. I stared at them. I don't need an institution. I'm fully capable of working, living, and... My mother shook her head. Don't be stubborn, dear. You can't possibly support yourself. And we can't keep living like this, always worrying if you'll be okay alone. That last sentence stung the worst. We can't keep living like this. As if my presence in a wheelchair was a burden they'd carried for far too long. My lip trembled, but I squared my shoulders and said nothing. Inside, I was seething. They truly thought my life was over, my potential crushed under the weight of an accident. They had no clue that my backup plan was nearing completion. And soon, I wouldn't need their permission or their pity. My nights belonged to the code. The platform had advanced beyond basic inventory tracking to something far more sophisticated, predictive analytics using machine learning. Users could forecast stock needs and shipping schedules with stunning accuracy. It was the kind of tool that big corporations paid fortunes for, except I was designing it to be accessible for smaller and mid-sized companies, the unsung backbone of the economy. The deeper I went, the more excited I got. I realized this wasn't just a good product, it was a game changer. If I could secure funding, I could roll out to an entire market segment that had been ignored by bloated enterprise software giants. Barry's company was already hooking others by word of mouth. Check out this system. It's unbelievably efficient. He told me they were eager to sign a real contract if I could turn my pilot tool into a legit platform. Quietly, I started writing a business plan. The name came to me in a dream, Vector Flow. It represented forward motion, something everyone assumed I'd lost. But my mind was traveling at light speed, forging ahead even if my legs couldn't. Somewhere in this swirl of ambition and frustration, I found my resolve hardening. They called me useless. Soon, they'd see I was unstoppable. A week later, while I was busy refining VectorFlow, my father barged into my room with a stack of brochures. Rehabilitation centers, he announced, tossing them onto my desk. Top-rated in the state. You'll get therapy, and they have on-site specialists. It's for the best. I didn't even glance at the brochures. My focus remained on the code in front of me. Dad, I'm fine. I have a project that's about to... He waved his hand dismissively. There's no future in that computer nonsense now, not with your condition. His words slammed into me like a punch. My condition? I repeated quietly. I still have a brain, Dad. He stared at me, expression torn between pity and annoyance. You're not listening. We're trying to help you accept reality. Reality. As if my wheelchair defined my entire existence. My father left in a huff when I refused to pick up the brochures. Once the door slammed, I pressed my forehead against the edge of my keyboard, battling tears. Enough, I thought. Enough belittling, enough pity, enough cruelty. If they wanted proof, I'd give them proof so big they'd never doubt me again. So I wiped my tears and emailed Barry, "Let's talk licensing deals. I'm ready." Barry responded within minutes. "We've got interest from 3 more companies. They want a demo ASAP." My heart pounded. This was it. I'd show these companies the alpha version of VectorFlow. If they liked it, I could secure pilot agreements. That would be my stepping stone to seeking venture capital. Within days, Barry arranged a video conference with all 3 interested parties. On the morning of the virtual demo, my mother hovered outside my bedroom door, complaining about the constant light from my computer. She had no clue I was about to pitch a technology that could net me millions in contracts. No clue that in half an hour, I'd be meeting with CEOs. Once the call started, I felt a familiar surge of confidence. This was my territory, my realm of logic and possibility. I walked them, figuratively at least, through VectorFlow's features: real-time stock tracking, predictive restock alerts, cost optimization tools. By the end, each CEO was leaning closer to their camera, eyes alight with interest. "Send us a proposal," they all said. One even joked, "How are you not already a household name in the industry?" I laughed. "Because you're seeing the beginning of what I can do." And oh, how satisfying it was. That evening at dinner, while my parents and siblings chatted about mundane things, I grinned at a new email on my phone. "Draft pilot agreement, pending your signature." Each pilot deal was worth a small but significant sum, with an option for long-term licensing if the platform met performance targets. I was on the verge of a breakthrough that could change my life forever. Yet my family's conversation drifted to how I might never be independent again, or how we should look at yard sales to fund medical bills. My mother shook her head gravely, as if discussing a terminal patient. I said nothing. Their ignorance was maddening, but my victory would be sweeter if I built quietly until the final reveal. So I excused myself from the dinner table, feigning exhaustion, and hurried back to my computer. Barry had also sent me a list of potential investors. "You're onto something huge, and you'll need capital," he wrote. That single sentence sparked a vision. A real startup, with me at the helm, my wheelchair a mere footnote in the success story I was forging. Nobody believed I could do it, except Barry. And maybe that was enough, because once the money rolled in, my family wouldn't just believe, they'd kneel in awe. I gave myself 2 weeks to secure the pilot agreements, and then approach investors. During that time, I lived in a haze of code, contracts, and quiet determination. My body still struggled with constant pain, but I adapted, rolling from bed to desk, medication breaks, regular check-ins with my doctor. My father kept dropping comments about accepting reality, each one more condescending than the last. My mother lamented that I was wasting my days on the computer instead of going to therapy at the rehab center. Meanwhile, I methodically tested every line of code in VectorFlow. No glitch would stand in my way. Finally, pilot day arrived. The 3 companies flipped the switch and let VectorFlow handle their live inventory data. I watched the real-time graphs populate on my screen, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Everything worked perfectly. Zero downtime, no fatal errors. Within 24 hours, I had preliminary reports from each pilot. Inventory management improved 40%, shipping costs dropped by 15%. The system was stable, efficient, a roaring success. Barry bombarded me with excited texts. They're in love with it. That night, my father asked me why I was smiling so smugly. I just shrugged, because I'm not as helpless as you think. Barry, ever the optimist, suggested we pitch VectorFlow to a big venture capital firm. His contact was an investor named Meredith Liu, known for backing disruptive tech. I was nervous. VC funding was no joke. But if Meredith got behind VectorFlow, we could scale exponentially. "Should we schedule an in-person meeting?" Barry asked me. "You'd need to travel to her office in the city." Travel. My stomach fluttered. My wheelchair made that complicated. But the thought of letting fear hold me back stung worse than the accident itself. "Yes," I said, resolved. "I'll go, wheelchair and all." I told my family I had a meeting and would need help getting into the city. My father scoffed, calling it a pointless exercise. My mother insisted on driving me, though she complained the whole time about traffic. We arrived at a sleek skyscraper. My mother frowned, confused. "Why here?" she asked. "Business meeting," I said simply. Then, I directed her to drop me at the lobby. She looked alarmed. Clearly she wanted to follow me in. But I was done letting her overshadow my every step. I told her I'd find my own way home. I rolled toward the elevator, heart pounding. This was my chance to prove them all wrong. Inside the investor's penthouse suite, polished floors gleamed, and panoramic windows overlooked the bustling city. Meredith Liu was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, hair pinned neatly. When I wheeled into the conference room, she greeted me warmly, without a trace of pity. "You must be the brains behind VectorFlow," she said, smiling as Barry closed the door behind us. "I've heard a lot about you." I exhaled with relief. No references to my accident, no thinly veiled sympathy. Instead, we jumped straight into my pitch. I laid out the tech specs, the pilot results, the projected market share. Barry chimed in with potential expansions, new features, and how smaller companies were an untapped goldmine. Meredith asked pointed questions: scalability, data security, global reach. Each time, I had a confident answer. My brain soared, weaving solutions and growth trajectories. By the end of the pitch, Meredith leaned back, impressed. "I'm prepared to offer you an initial seed investment of $5 million, she said coolly, in exchange for a modest equity stake. $5 million. My throat tightened. That money would supercharge VectorFlow, let me hire a team, move out of my parents' home, finally stand on my own in every sense. I nodded, pulse hammering. "We have a deal." I left Meredith's office with a signed term sheet. In the elevator, Barry and I exchanged triumphant grins. $5 million was only the beginning. If we hit our milestones, the valuation could skyrocket. Outside, my mother waited, looking impatient. The moment she saw my smile, she frowned, suspicious. "What happened in there?" she demanded. I wanted so badly to wave the term sheet in her face and shout, "I'd just secured $5 million for my project." But something stopped me. Perhaps I wanted to reveal it on my own terms, in my own dramatic way, after the funds were in the bank. "Just a meeting," I said. "I'll tell you later." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't know why you're so secretive. You're setting yourself up for disappointment." I bit my lip. Let her think that. Let them all think that, until I was ready to unleash the truth. Because once we have officially closed the funding round, there'd be an announcement. News headlines, press releases, congratulations from all corners. My family wouldn't just learn about it from me, they'd watch the world recognize my genius. As we drove home, my mother chastised me for dragging her into the city. I stayed silent, imagining the day they'd all see me on the front page of a business journal. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Legal paperwork, forming an official corporation around VectorFlow, setting up a new bank account for the seed investment. I hired 2 developers, both brilliant in their fields, to help scale the platform. We rented a small, co-working space downtown for in-person collaboration. Though I was still wheelchair-bound, I insisted on being physically present at least twice a week to keep team morale high. Meanwhile, my parents noticed my absences and the hush-hush phone calls. My father asked if I'd finally given in to going to a special facility. I smiled. "No, Dad. Quite the opposite." He rolled his eyes. "You'll see. This little fantasy will collapse, and then you'll come begging for help." But day by day, VectorFlow gained traction. The pilot companies renewed their licenses, paying healthy fees. We added new clients. Each signed contract inched me closer to that breathtaking goal, a real multi-million-dollar valuation. One evening, I overheard my brother mocking me, telling a cousin, "She's fiddling with some computer nonsense again. It's pathetic." I almost laughed out loud. If only he knew I was about to close the biggest deal of my life. Soon, I thought, they'll see what true power looks like in a world of software and data. Meredith, our investor, arranged a media interview to promote VectorFlow. It was just a short feature for a business tech blog, but it was my first public spotlight. She suggested I focus on the technology's real-world impact, telling success stories from pilot clients. It sounded perfect. Then came the question I dreaded. "We'd like photos of you at your workspace." That meant revealing the wheelchair. I felt a twinge of vulnerability. While I'd never hidden my disability, I worried about being labeled the crippled founder. But I realized this was a chance to showcase resilience. My brain was unstoppable, legs or not. When the blog post went live, the headline read, "Meet the brilliant founder redefining inventory management from her wheelchair." My phone buzzed with congratulatory texts from Barry, my new developers, even Meredith. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Strangers on social media called me an inspiration. At home, though, my family's reaction was muted. My mother avoided the topic. My father mumbled something about exploiting pity. My siblings didn't even mention it. But the story was out in the world. And for the first time, I felt the power of public validation. No matter how my family dismissed me, the wider world recognized my worth. VectorFlow's growth became exponential when one of our pilot clients, a well-known retail chain, recommended us to their international partners. Suddenly, we had inquiries from overseas. Meredith was ecstatic. She urged us to prepare for a new funding round, Series A, that could catapult our valuation into the tens of millions. While my co-founders and I prepared pitch decks, my parents escalated their campaign to send me off to a care facility. One evening, they cornered me in the living room, brandishing new brochures. "You can't just keep pretending you're fine, dear," my mother said, voice trembling with false concern. I stared at her. "Pretending? I'm working. I'm fine." My father's nostrils flared. "You're in denial. We'll all be better off if you let professionals handle your daily needs. You can't rely on charity from your ex-colleagues forever." Charity? A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Dad, I'm building a business. We have paying clients. We're about to..." He raised his hand, cutting me off. "This discussion is over. We've made the decision." I looked at my mother's face, at her smug expression, and realized they had zero idea how far I'd come. The next time they tried to boss me around would be the last. Because soon, I wouldn't live under their roof at all. I launched into the Series A fundraising with ferocity. We pitched to 4 major venture capital firms, showing them skyrocketing client interest, robust pilot data, and a proven record of scaling. My wheelchair was never an obstacle in those rooms. People cared about results, about profitability. By the second pitch, I felt unstoppable. Sure enough, we received multiple term sheets, each vying to invest millions in exchange for a slice of the company. Meredith guided me, reminding me to negotiate. "Don't just jump at the first number," she said with a grin. "You're holding all the cards." When the dust settled, VectorFlow closed a $15 million Series A round. Our post-money valuation? $50 million. I stared at that number, tears pricking my eyes. 50 million. My platform, born in the darkest hours of my recovery, was now a star on the rise. That night, we celebrated at the co-working space. My team raised plastic cups of soda. None of us had time to buy real champagne, and toasted. Cameras flashed for a quick group photo. I was beaming like never before. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with repeated calls from my parents, but I ignored them. Because tomorrow, I would reveal everything and show them just how useless I was. The next morning, a major business publication broke the news. VectorFlow raises 15 million, valued at $50 million. My face, wheelchair and all, was featured in a bold headline. My phone erupted. Friends from college, old colleagues, even random internet strangers flooded my inbox with congratulations. But the call I was truly waiting for came from my mother. She sounded breathless. "What is this article about?" "It shows your picture. Valuations. Are you in trouble?" She still thought valuation might mean some kind of debt, no doubt. I smiled into the phone. "Not trouble, Mom. Success. My company just raised $15 million in funding. We're valued at $50 million. Her gasp was audible. "That can't be right. You..." "Crippled? Yes, but also fully capable of leading a tech startup." "Surprised?" Silence. Then she mumbled, "Your father needs to hear this." A few hours later, they summoned me to the living room again. This time, they weren't brandishing brochures. Instead, my father looked pale, my mother wrung her hands, and my siblings hovered nearby. I parked my wheelchair before them, calm and resolute. "Yes, I did it," I said simply. "I built a company. We're worth $50 million now. Care to call me useless again?" The stunned silence was more satisfying than any applause. My father's face switched between disbelief and forced pride. My mother stammered, "You? How did you? Why didn't you tell us?" I shrugged. "Would you have believed me? You kept insisting I was a burden. You tried to send me to a facility. You never once asked what I was doing on that computer." My sister, Clara, murmured, "I knew you were coding something, but this is huge." She looked both awed and guilty for not standing by me. My brother, on the other hand, tried to salvage the moment. "Well, that's great news for the family. We can all benefit from this, right?" He gave a smile that reeked of opportunism. I narrowed my eyes. There it was, the sudden shift from useless cripple to meal ticket. In an instant, they changed their tune. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm. Finally, my father cleared his throat, adopting a paternal tone. "We're proud of you, of course. So proud. Now we can all move forward together, as a family." "The family business." I held up a hand. "This isn't a family business. Vector Flow is mine. You never believed in me. You don't get to claim it now." My father's gaze hardened. "Don't talk to me like that, young lady. We raised you, gave you everything." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Raised me? Sure. But what about after my accident, when you decided I was worthless? When you tried to ship me off to a care facility because you couldn't be bothered to accommodate me?" My mother's eyes welled with tears, whether from guilt or embarrassment. I couldn't tell. My brother attempted a more diplomatic approach. "Sis, let's calm down. We're just excited about your success. Maybe you can help pay off some of Dad's debts or..." Anger flared in me. Did any of you ever ask if I needed help setting up my business? Or if I wanted moral support? You only see me now because the number $50 is attached to my name. Their silence confirmed the ugly truth. Clara bit her lip, looking away. I felt a pang of pity for her. She'd shown the slightest empathy, but never enough to help me. Now it was too late. I turned to leave. "I'm moving out next week," I said. "I've got my own place thanks to the company's success. I won't be a burden under your roof. Happy?" The moment I announced I was leaving, my father tried to pivot. "Wait, hold on. That's not what we wanted. We just thought you needed special care." I spun my wheelchair around. "I care for myself just fine, and if I need physical therapy or home assistance, I can afford it on my own." As I left the living room, my mother whispered, "You don't have to go." But her voice lacked conviction. They had expected control over me forever, never imagining I could surpass them financially or personally. In the days that followed, word spread among extended relatives. An uncle I barely knew sent me a message praising my accomplishments and hinting at a small loan request. Cousins who mocked my wheelchair now texted me about business ideas. The hypocrisy was suffocating. But it also lit a fire in me. I wouldn't let them exploit me. My sister Clara was the only one who apologized. She confessed she felt pressured by our parents to treat me as incapable. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you," she said. I believed her sincerity, but trust wasn't rebuilt overnight. By the end of that week, I had a key to my new apartment in the city, a part-time nurse for my rehab exercises, and a burning desire to never rely on my family again. Moving day arrived. A hired van carried my belongings, mostly clothes, books, my beloved computer setup. My father offered half-hearted help, but I declined. My mother lingered in the driveway, eyes shining with tears. I felt a mix of resentment and pity. Maybe one day we could talk about forgiveness, but not yet. My new apartment overlooked the river, with wide hallways and an accessible bathroom. Independence beckoned. From my bedroom window, I could see the city skyline where my company's future soared. Vector Flow was about to sign 3 new clients in Europe, thanks to the Series A funding. Our expansion was unstoppable. That night, after the movers left, I sat in my wheelchair by the window, the city lights twinkling below. A surge of emotion overwhelmed me. Relief, triumph, a lingering sadness over my family's betrayal. But mostly, I felt pride. I had done this, broken the chains of their pity and disbelief. And I did it on my terms. My phone buzzed, a text from Meredith, congratulating me on the move. She also mentioned a rumor that a large corporate giant might want to acquire Vector Flow if we reached certain milestones. The potential sums floated around 9 digits. My heart fluttered. This was only the beginning of what I could achieve. The following weeks were a revelation. Freed from my parents' oppressive atmosphere, I flourished. Physical therapy sessions, though challenging, progressed steadily in my new space. My nurse, Asha, cheered each small victory, like standing upright for a few seconds with crutches. Step by step, I was regaining control of my body. Meanwhile, Vector Flow's expansions soared. Our team grew from 3 developers to 10. We took on offices in multiple cities. Clients raved about how we transformed their inventory nightmares into streamlined profit machines. The once crippling sense of limitation I felt after the accident faded each time I completed a new line of code or signed a new deal. I rarely visited my parents. Occasionally, Clara called to chat, but it was stiff, uncertain. My mother wrote tearful emails about missing me, and my father left gruff voicemails about how family should stick together. But I needed distance. The memory of being called useless still burned. Then came a surprising request. An invitation to a family gathering. "Your grandmother wants everyone there," Clara said. "She's the one person in the family who always cared for you." I hesitated. Did I really want to face them all again? Maybe I could handle it now, especially if I arrived with the dignity they once tried to strip away. On the day of the family gathering, I dressed in a professional blouse and tailored slacks, sitting straight in my wheelchair. My car, fully equipped with hand controls, let me drive myself. Moment I rolled up to my parents' house, I felt the tension in the air. Inside, uncles, aunts, and cousins milled about. Whispers followed me. Then my grandmother saw me, and her eyes lit up with genuine warmth. She hugged me, careful around the wheelchair, and whispered, "I always knew you were extraordinary." My father approached, looking awkward. My mother hovered by his side. "You're doing well?" he ventured. I nodded. "Better than ever." I didn't elaborate on Vector Flow's unstoppable success or the new $1 million deals. My presence alone spoke volumes. Cousins asked me about my tech stuff, trying to fish for details on how much money I had. I gave polite, vague answers. My brother attempted a friendly grin, but it fell flat. They all realized the power dynamic had shifted forever. No longer was I the helpless cripple. I was the thriving entrepreneur. As evening fell, I excused myself. My grandmother kissed my cheek, proud. And with a final glance at my parents, who looked regretful, if not ashamed, I left. Outside, city lights shimmered with promise. My $50 backup plan wasn't just a plan anymore. It was my reality, and I no longer needed anyone's approval to shine.